everyone, and welcome to another SheClicks webinar. This webinar is sponsored by MPB, proud supporters of the Royal Photographic Society's postgraduate bursary. MPB is delighted to introduce the 2019 recipient Cocoa Laney to the SheClicks community. MPB is there to support all female photographers on their creative journey. Whether you're looking to buy, sell, trade used camera kit, MPB offers better value, better choice, and better gear for your budget. Visit mpb.com to find out more. So tonight's webinar is presented by Cocoa Laney, who, as I've already mentioned, was the recipient of the 2019 RPS postgraduate bursary. Hi Coco, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Good, I'm very well, thank you. I wish Zoom would play a bit nicer with Facebook. I think there's been an update and it's kind of set it all off kilter, but never mind, we're here and we've got a nice big audience all raring to go and hear about your personal projects.
All right. Should I go ahead and start sharing my screen?
That would be great. Yes, thank you.
So, hi, my name is Cocoa Laney, and as we just talked about, I'm the recipient of the 2019 RPS postgraduate bursary. I'm a graduate of London College of Communications, MA in photojournalism and documentary photography, and I'm American, as you can probably hear. So alas, I'm no longer in London. I'm coming to you from Washington State today to talk to you a little bit about my project and sort of how that happened, how that was made possible by the bursary, by the RPS and MPB, and a little bit about how you can develop your own personal project, the things that go into this wonderful creative process that we're all here to learn about and explore. So a personal project, how do you define that? It's a bit self-explanatory, but I think I had a different idea of what that was prior to pursuing my MA and starting to work in the capacity that I work in now. When I was younger, I always had this idea that I would go off and be sent to these far-flung locations to make these projects and tell these stories in this sort of photojournalistic golden age sort of style. And that's sadly not really how things work anymore. It can at a certain level. But usually most photographers, especially documentary photographers, are making their own work and then going out and pitching the things that they develop on their own. There's far less commissions for that type of work, and a lot more of it is just produced by the people that are close to it and that love it and that care about it, which is, yeah, not a bad thing at all. I would argue that it's actually really good in a lot of ways. That's the people that are close to the issues that they're talking about are the ones that are making the work. But it also means that you have to be a little bit more creative when thinking about how to approach a documentary project, because if you're the one that's doing everything from the idea conceptualization, from the photography aspect, obviously, and the funding, yeah, it's a lot for one person to think about and to conceptualize. So we're going to talk about that today. But before we do, I'm going to tell you about the project that I did. That is the reason that I'm here right now. So it's called Belle. And yeah, the slide is pretty explanatory, but I'll go ahead and read you. During the summer of 2019, I visited 15 different towns while meeting young women and non-binary people, many of whom invited me to sleep in their homes. Through conversations about shame, religion, and gender identity, the trip became a pilgrimage to find intimacy and connection in a region that can feel simultaneously familiar and inaccessible, even to those who know it best. Moreover, as Alabama continues to make headlines in regards to women's rights in the age of Trump, I'm interested in exploring how this new generation of Southerners reconcile their relationship to the state and navigate the contradictions and extremes inherent to Southern identity. These contradictions are especially apparent in the archetype of the idealized Southern woman, who's often expected to be resilient, yet obedient and demure in her strength. As the trip progressed, each participant in the project wrote a letter to the next anonymous woman I would meet on the next stop, sharing stories, creating a network of encouragement among strangers. And the resulting work explores the nuances of contemporary Southernness with a diverse array of young people, giving an intimate view of life in present-day Alabama from a female perspective. Beyond this, it marks my own attempts to come to terms with the place I still call home. So I was raised in Alabama. I lived there until I was 21, moved away for grad school, and worked in Florida on and off, but really most of my life has been based in the South. I'm 26 now. Um, Went back for a bit at the beginning of the pandemic. And I grew up in a family that just didn't really talk about things, specifically in regards to religion and sexuality. And shame was a really large part of my life because of that. There were all of these sort of social norms that I felt like I had to adhere to based off of the environment that I was in. It was not very open-minded. There wasn't a lot of dialogue about the things that I really desperately needed to talk about. And I didn't really realize that until I moved away. And then when I came back for this project, I started talking to other women that also had experiences that were in a way similar to mine, but also not. You know, there's this archetype of the Southern belle, this very hyper feminine, generally white, thin, idealized woman that's, yeah, is still prevalent today. And that's not really accurate. It never has been accurate. It's a really, really problematic stereotype. And I wanted to go back and explore, yeah, my own feelings about this place where I grew up, but also talk to other women that had very different experiences from me. And also non-binary people, people whose gender identity was different than mine. And bring together this sort of collection of stories. I came from it, from my perspective, from my set of personal experiences, but I also wanted to involve women who had very different experiences than I did. There's a lot of issues within the South that I personally cannot attest to. Being a young white woman, I wanted to involve women of color as much as possible. The final book is a collection of interviews, so rather than me telling all of these stories, I really wanted it to be this sort of collective of voices, that because all of the women I worked with have voices, they can tell their own story. And yeah, this is sort of what I came up with on that set of images from a really intense 6-week road trip of sleeping in strangers' homes and talking to a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. And each person wrote next one a letter sharing words of advice or words of encouragement, whatever they wanted to say to this anonymous stranger that would be receiving it. And that sort of functioned as a way of connecting all of these really disparate stories and highlighting the overlap, people's experiences with things like shame and things like overcoming, yeah, maybe upbringings that they are now questioning but don't feel okay about talking about or didn't feel okay about talking about. And also highlighting the differences in those stories and the fact that the South is still a region that is very, very, very unequal on a lot of levels. And I wanted to emphasize that as well, that no two stories alike, and we have a lot of work to do before getting to a point where, yeah, these stories can be looked at in a way that is equal. But anyways, so that's a little bit about the project, and it ended up being a book. I like working with books. I like working with text, image and text, and the combination thereof is something that I'm very, very interested in. And it was quite a time. It's hard to imagine now going on a road trip and staying with strangers, but yeah, last summer was a bit of a different world. And yeah, the reasons why I did it were sort of varied, personal, but also political. Political in the sense that last year, Alabama was one of the many states in the US to push through a very draconian ban on abortion that was a thinly veiled attempt to overturn Roe versus Wade. And again, this sort of thing is common in the South. Another recent event that we had was the special synod election with Roy Moore, who was credibly accused of sexual assault by multiple women and was very nearly elected to Senate regardless. Alabama has a very bad track record with women's rights. And again, these laws will affect the people that most desperately need protection from these sorts of predatory men, these restrictive legislation. So I was angry about that, but also my own upbringing, my own sort of sense of shame and sense of just having to reconceptualize what I thought to be true about myself, about my own belief system, about my own sexuality, my body, all of these things that I grew up with not being able to talk about. I used this project as a way to sort of open up that dialogue and sit down with people and really examine that part of my life, that part of my own story. Going back and talking to my mom after years of really not doing that about what she faced. Growing up in a very different way than me. She had children very young, had a very different life than me, and sort of adhered to these expectations that were put on her culturally in a way that I didn't, because I had different opportunities, and all of this stuff sort of fed into me wanting to do this project. But before this, I was a freelance, portrait photographer in a beach community in Florida. I went down there in the summer, starting from a very young age. Ended up photographing upwards of like 500 families over the span of 7 years. And, it's obviously a really different kind of photography. And I think for a while, I wanted to separate them as much as I could. I have my serious documentary work, and then I have my my money making sort of thing that I also loved. I was working with people, I was getting to know people, and that job financed most of my life. Even now, I'm so grateful for it. And I also learned a lot of skills working as a freelancer that also played into doing personal work like this. Meeting new people, learning how to make them feel okay in front of a camera, making them feel seen in a way that isn't scary necessarily. I'm very bad at being in photos. And the photographer that I work with, when I have headshots done, it makes all the difference, being able to feel like, okay, I can relax, I can be myself with this person. That's a skill that you need no matter what kind of photography you're doing, if you're working with people. And I got to hone that with my freelance work. And professionalism, good word of mouth, the same goes with personal projects. If you're not working ethically, if you're unkind, if you're not professional, you're not going to want, or people are not going to want to work with you. They're not going to want to pay you, but if you're doing personal work, they're just not going to want to be involved with what you're doing because you're not credible. So learning that sense of professionalism was also very important. And yeah, with those things, you have to understand yourself. You have to understand what sets you apart, what makes your eye unique. And that's something that I learned doing commercial work, learning to market myself through that. It fed into my personal work. And yeah, the big secret of that is a lot of times your personal work is what's going to get you hired, what's going to get you noticed by the kinds of publications you might want to work for, by other clients, by whatever it is you're wanting to do. Your personal work, the stuff that is you, that really says, this is who I am as a photographer, this is what I care about. That's what people want to see more than, oh, I was paid to do this thing that's for this magazine that I was on commission. That's important. People want to know you can work on commission. Again, you can be professional, you can do a good job, but they also want to know who you are. So yeah, you need to balance the two. And especially when you're first starting out, you're not going to be able to survive on persons alone. That's impossible, even when you're far ahead in your career. I don't know many people that can do that. So yeah, this is a commission that I did with The Guardian in February, and I got that via my work on the MA, and internship there, work experience there. But that, had I not had Bell, had I not had my personal work and been able to use that as a sort of calling card of, this is the kind of photographer that I am. So other ways of funding a personal project besides doing freelance beach photography in Florida, because that's not an option for most people. It's a very interesting way of going about things. Teaching and assisting is a big one. I really like working with people. That's why I'm a photographer. I like talking about what I do outside of just, this is a thing that I made. I like talking about all the ins and outs. So teaching is a natural fit for me. I do a little bit of it, more and more sort of with this pandemic. And I also do a lot of assisting work, assisting teaching and also assisting other photographers, photo editing and retouching. I know a lot of people that do that on a full-time basis, just freelance through sites like Upwork. There's a lot of different ways you can find that work. As a freelancer, not necessarily taking images, but editing images. My other job that I'm actually at right now, you can't really see it, but I'm in the back room of a photo lab where I scan negatives. And that's sort of my bread and butter job right now. It's a lot of fun. I'm still, doing a thing that I like to do. I would be sitting at home scanning negatives anyway. Just I'm doing it for other people's photos. And obviously grants and sponsorships, getting your name out there, learning how to write, learning how to pitch yourself. These are all really important things. And yeah, my MA project would not have happened the way it did if it wasn't for the RPS grants. So getting to choosing a personal project, how do you do that? There's a couple questions you need to ask yourself. And the first one is, what makes you tick? So when I was younger, and again, still in that sort of mentality of, oh, I want to do some sort of project that makes a difference, but I don't really know what that is. And like, I don't know, maybe somebody will tell me. Not really, nobody's gonna tell you. You have to ask yourself, what do you care about? And there's that Kappa quote about, if your photos aren't good enough, you're not close. It's super cliche, but it's also really true. But that's also kind of vague. You know, how do you figure out what is close to you, especially if you're not used to working in that way? A lot of times it just takes looking around, looking into your day-to-day environment, specifically in that pandemic, in this pandemic that we are still in, and it's going on and on and on, especially here in the US and the UK. We have to look at our environments in a really different way and be open to what's around us. So ask yourself, what do you do every day? Who do you talk to? What do you walk by on your way to work? If you're working from home, you know, what does you take to keep yourself sane? Pay attention to these things. I know that I was like this, again, like this idea of I want to go to places that are exotic, that I don't know, and tell stories that I don't know, that are maybe removed from me in a way. Um, and there's a long history of that in photojournalism, in documentary photography, that I would argue has actually done a lot of harm, because you send photographers to these places that they don't really know. And what happens? Stereotypes are perpetuated. People that don't really have, lived experience in these places become the people that are narrating these stories to the masses. And, you know, sometimes the most intimate and honest work happens in places that are close to you. So just really, really look at your own environments. Look at what's happening in the news. What issues are you getting angry about? Again, that abortion ban. I was living in the UK at the time that went through, and I was so, yeah, I mean, it felt very personal. And that news story was a large catalyst for the way that I work as a photographer now. It's informed the work that I did then. It's continuing to inform the work that I do now, because you see what's happening with our Supreme Court right now. This is a fight that's very far from being over. And then just things like, what are you reading? What are you watching? What other non-photography things are you interested in? I read a lot. Again, I work with text a lot. I work with books. So books inform a lot of what I do as a photographer. I read a lot of Rebecca Solnit lately, and her prose informs a lot of the personal projects that I've made. And yeah, I don't think that photographers should limit themselves to photographic mediums. If you do that, you're going to miss out on a lot of other inspiration. So just think about, who are you as a person? Not just as a photographer. Who are you as a person? What do you care about? And yeah, basically know yourself really well. Keep a diet. Heck, if you have the financial resources, therapy is fantastic. If you're dealing with especially real world problems that are tough and that are scary, getting to know yourself is big. And also, in this time, people find themselves cooped up with the same people, but that can actually be a really great thing. Sometimes those sources of inspiration are the people that are closest to you. So here's some projects that I really love, that were done in people's homes. Matt Finn made this really, really beautiful portrait of his mother who raised him. He photographed her over the series of, I think, 30 years from the time that he was 16. He photographed her from 1987 until she died, and created this really intimate portrait of, something that we as a society maybe don't look at this closely and this still. You know, there's the stereotype about women disappearing as they get older, and he use this project to spotlight his mother in this nuanced and very loving way. And yeah, it's just this very mundane quotidian thing, but again, very, very emotional. Diana Markosian has a project called Inventing My Father. She was separated from her father. Her family moved to the US from Moscow when she was quite young, and she went, I believe, 15 years. 15 years without seeing him. And then when they reconnected, she used a photographic project as a way to sort of explore this new relationship, explore this person that she didn't really know. And it's a really amazing story. I really recommend checking out the links that I have on these slides, looking at these projects more in depth. I can't spend so much time on them, but it's relevant to what we're talking about, and it's a really good source of inspiration. Other people that have made these beautiful personal projects about the people closest to them. And then Nan Golden is an amazing example of that as well. She's a little bit older photographer. She was very prominent in the 80s and has inspired generations of photographers that have gone out and documented their lives. There's a really amazing quote from her. She photographed her lovers, her friends, acquaintances in the New York City bar scene, in the LGBTQ scene in the 80s. And it was presented as this slideshow. She had it set to music, these series of sort of snapshotty images of the people that she knew and also herself. This is a self-portrait. And yeah, the quote that I was going to read is basically, as she says in the description for this, there's a popular notion that the photographer, is by nature a voyeur, the last one invited to a party. But I'm not crashing the party. This is my party. This is my family, my history. And yeah, I mean, it's a snapshot of her life, her very specific life, sort of within a community that's marginalized, and is very open and sometimes hard to look at, but it's honest and it's hers. So yeah, things like that are, again, important to think about. But the other thing that makes Nan Golden's work really resonant is it's her life, but it also connects to broader themes. Was the AIDS crisis in New York, and it depicts something that was very culturally relevant at the time, but also the love and the tenderness in these images is something that even if you've never lived in the New York City party scene in the 80s, you can probably recognize. So your story connects to broader themes. Yes, personal stories are engaging, but you also have to know, well, why do people that don't know me care about this? How can I trace this back into something that's happening in the news, that's a common universal experience? Why do people want to see this beyond just, these are pretty images and this is something I care about? Am I making this project for an audience? If the answer is no, then you don't really have to ask yourself that. You're making it for you. This is something cathartic, and this is something that's, you're doing for yourself, and that's okay. There's a place for that. Not every project has to be something that's published, has to be something that's put out there in the world. But if you want it to be, it's important to articulate, why. Why should other people see this? What's important about this? Why should they see it now? So you also don't have to work with people. This is another fantastic personal project by my friend Alba, who's also a graduate from the 2019 MA. She's Spanish, and she went back and visited sites that were potential burial grounds for people that had disappeared in the Spanish Civil War. So they're really mundane images, really quotidian, but there's a darkness to them, because if you read the description, you know that these are sites where there are potentially bodies buried from people that have disappeared, people that were never able to be traced back. She lost her grandfather in this war, so she went through this photographing these places with this knowledge that my grandfather could be here, could be at this site. Due to the politics of the time, again, there was so much that was lost, this sort of hidden history. She went back and photographed one of those burial sites, and then in the installation, you can see them on the grounds, but the images of these, again, very everyday places are on the wall. There's no living people in these images. And they come across as very clinical, very cold, but also, yeah, it's a personal project. It's something that touches Alba very deeply, touches her family very deeply. So that brings us to Alba obviously had to do a great deal of research to do a project like that. And I believe that really any project that is that is something that's, yeah, you're going to be working on and you're going to be putting into the world, you should do research on. Even if it is personal, even the most personal thing, you should know, well, what are these themes that I'm working on? For me, it was things like gender and shame and sexuality and religion. Who's writing about these things? What work exists there in the place that I'm working, but also just worldwide on these themes? What can I contribute to that conversation? What has already been said? It's important to know that. But also know your power as a photographer. Know your subject, know your biases, know what angle you're coming at the story from. Don't just assume that you are an expert because it's close to you. Because again, as we've seen this year, there's a lot, there's a lot of power imbalance within our society, and the photographers inherently have power just by having a camera telling a story. But also it tends to be people with privilege that have that ability to have that camera and tell that story in a way that gets attention, and that's not ideal. We're working as an industry to change that, I would like to think and hope. So if you are a person in a position of privilege, of power, of any sort, be aware of that and be sensitive to that. Use your position for good, and research issues that maybe don't affect you, that are still a part of your story, so you can, just be a better person, be a better, not just better photographer, but a better person, a better human working in this industry that we're all trying to make more inclusive and open. And also just, again, look outside of photography, look into things like sociology and history and psychology. The research you do shouldn't just be photographic, just as your inspiration shouldn't just be photographic. You should be drawing from a wide array of sources. And also collaborate with people. If there's issues that you're working on that you don't really have the authority to speak on, involve other people that can. Talk to historians, local writers, family and friends, people that are close to the subject at heart, or just they can offer a different perspective. And there's different levels of collaboration. You can do a participatory project, hand over cameras to the people that you're photographing, have them press the shutter rather than you take the image. There's a really great book on that talks about the different levels of collaboration, which I'm not going to go into because it's super complicated, but I have the name there, Education for Socially Engaged Art. So if you're concerned about, okay, this is a project that I want to do, but I want to do it in a way that maybe I'm not speaking over people that, have a more lived experience in this, or I want to involve different communities or different voices. This is a good resource of ways to do that. So Pablo Helguera is the name of the writer of that book. Really recommend it. It's helped me in my own practice. And also you can just team up with other photographers. That's what I did early in the pandemic. I worked with my friend Adam back in London, and we photographed people here in the South, but also back in the UK, and asked them to create little collages, little drawings of things that were bringing them comfort during the pandemic. And people just responded with an array of things. Some people just gave recipes for chocolate chip cookies because they were baking a lot. Some people gave poems. Some people made these sort of vision boards of things that they wanted to do when this pandemic was done, or things that were giving them hope. And the images were a combination of mine and Adam's, and we worked together and just kind of kept each other accountable and kept each other sane. Really, the project was about comforts that our subjects were finding, but also the comfort that we found having a creative outlet in a really scary time. So yeah, these are ways to get started, things to think about when you're approaching a project. But also, it's really important to think about the technical side of things. Know your camera really well. You should, it's silly to say, but I'm very much of the mentality that you should know your tool, so then you can go off and break all the rules. Know how your shutter speed works, know how to master depth of field, know how to use your lighting to the best of your ability, because that feeds into the project that you're going to make. don't just shoot film because you think it's cool. I love film. I use a combination of digital and film, but I also, yeah, I think a lot about my subject, a lot about, where am I going to be going? Am I going to be able to take the time to shoot with a medium format camera, or do I need something quick? Do I need something where there's a quicker turnaround? Should I be shooting digital? Really think about these questions when you're starting a personal project. What environments are you going to be working in? What do you have access to? And as I was saying, make sure you know that camera that you choose. The best camera you have, or the best camera, the best camera possible is the camera you have. That old stereotype of, you can do amazing work with something that maybe isn't that fancy because you know how to use it. It's available to you. Use what you have and know what you have. Consider things like time of day and lighting. Black and white, also think about that. If you want to do a project in black and white, why are you doing it in black and white? Is it because you really like the richness of the tones? You really like the emotional edge that black and white gives you? Or because, okay, maybe the lighting wasn't great, the white balance was off. If I put it in black and white, nobody will notice. They will probably notice. If you're using black and white as a way to cover up for not knowing your equipment, it's usually really obvious. Please don't do that. If you're using black and white because it's beautiful and adds something to your story, absolutely, by all means. And also, do you want to use film or digital? Or do you want to use a process that's totally off the wall? I'm going to show you some examples of people that have done all of these things to give a little bit of inspiration on that front. But yeah, Sig Harvey is an incredible photographer, and she uses color in this really emotional and really just, studied sort of way. I think there's at least for me, I tend to fall into the trap of, color, an image that it has strong color has to use a lot of color. Well, not necessarily. You can hone in on one particular tone. So she writes about color, saying that it's a visual reminder that we are all alive and embracing it. And color celebrates the basic human desire to be surrounded by beauty. It resonates in a corporeal sense, first and last. These images are riotous and gluttonous, explosive and dramatic, full of life, yet simultaneously suffocating and terrifying. And I think all of those adjectives can be applied to what we are collectively experiencing with the pandemic right now. And yeah, just her use of color sort of brings up all of these emotions, and it's lovely. And things like shutter speed and focus and depth of field, Francesca Woodman is a great example of that. She's very, very kind of, I don't know, it's hard to talk about Francesca Woodman because people like to tie her work back into her life, which, that is inextricable in a way. But she died very young and very tragically, and people tend to want to go back and look at her images and point them to, this is her way of externalizing her internal suffering. I think it's also just important to talk about images. They are really beautiful, aside from her personal trauma and pain. They do articulate, for me, there's a lot of femininity in them, and they articulate this feminine experience in this very disorienting and very sort of dramatic way. And she used her camera and the controls like shutter speed, the controls like long exposure, things that are very technical to make these images that feel very, very visceral in a way, and very there's a lot of movement to them. So yeah, Francesca Woodman is a really good reference for me. Also working on themes that have to do with femininity and have to do with a lot of the stuff that she touches on. I recommend looking more into her work and not getting so caught up in the drama of her life and just really looking at these images. What is she saying with them? You can also stage things. I know it's kind of counterintuitive with documentary photography, but sometimes the best way to get to a truth, especially a truth that maybe is unseen or is not able to be photographed, is to stage that. Of course, be open about it. If you're doing a project where there is staging involved, especially if it's in the documentary realm, be honest that, this is how these images were made. Don't sell it off to be like, yes, I actually did this thing. But the reason that Paula Paredes chose to stage her images was they were made of sort of her idea of what it would look like within these religious institutions for women that are lesbians in Ecuador. And they're very, very abusive institutions, highly surveilled. She was not able to get access to them. But women there, a lot of times, are subjected to them if they come from families that are not accepting. Hers was. So she did not have to go through this sort of abuse, but she did a series of interviews and research with women that did a lot of research into the way these facilities are run and staged these images based off of what are objective facts. You know, these images are documents of things that are happening. This is not actually an image of that. This is her hiring actors and staging it to the best of her ability based off of something that is truthful and is happening in real life. So if that's something that you're interested in, you know, the story that's happening that you don't have access to, that is, you know, unable to be photographed. This is not something that somebody can go in and actually make images of, but it's important that this is seen, that this is talked about. You know, this is an abuse of human rights, and this project it sheds light on something that's, yeah, needs to be addressed. And she basically describes this project as a mirror into an experience of what might have been for her, Paula Paredes, had she had less accepting parents. And by putting herself in the shoes of that, really intensifies the horror of what's really happening in these places. As for alternative processes, my friend Tim from IMA did a really wonderful COVID project just by going out and taking daily walks and collecting plants and using a process called anthotypes to make these prints of the plants that he found. It's a temporal medium. This way of working actually uses the dyes from these plants. You put them in the sun, they develop over a series of days, and then they'll fade again. But this was his way of sort of talking about how small his world had become with the pandemic, you know, only having access to his neighborhood and coming home at the end of the day with these little plant clippings, using their dyes and their pigments to make these images. You know, they're photographs, they're actually images of actual plants, but the process he used was really relevant to what was happening in the rest of the world. And his quote on that was, he says that he sees the project as not just documenting his experience of lockdown, but also documenting his local area. It was a welcome distraction from the external chaos and the uncertainty of the world, and also a welcome distraction from endlessly checking social media and news, you know, working in this process that's quite literally just with plants in the natural world. You know, there's no machine involved, there's no camera involved, but they're still photographs, they're images. And then Jo DeVanzi did the same thing, working in a very different project. She used a Kodak brownie that was being used in the 1918 flu pandemic and made these collodion prints of her life in lockdown with her family. Yeah, she wanted to harken back to the sort of historical elements of this pandemic, you know, the way that we talk about it, the way we visualize it now, the things that we're going through are maybe not so different from the way it was with the Spanish flu pandemic. And so by using this historical process, she's able to sort of point to that. And the images are just amazing. And also self-portraits. You can use self-portraits in a personal project to, yeah, maybe say something that is close to you. If it's relevant to it, if you are involved in the narrative of your project, they're scary, but they have a power to them. So this is from a New York Times article. Black photographers being asked to comment on how they felt during lockdown and during the protests that have been happening in the US, the anti-racism protests, the Black Lives Matter movements. And I really recommend going to this link below, reading what these photographers have to say about these portraits. So for example, Miranda Barnes, the image here, she says that, I've been thinking of the rural and suburban Black communities and how often redlining gets pushed aside during the conversations we're currently having. While my county is no way near as isolating as other regions, systemic racism through zoning is a calculated form of oppression in Long Island, and I wanted to capture that isolation. So she can't really capture that isolation going out into the world now. You know, there's so many restrictions of what we can and can't do because of this pandemic. But she can talk about her own experience in relation to that. She can photograph herself in relation to that, and her own emotional relation to that in this self-portrait is a really eloquent yet understated way of doing that. So yeah, I included one in my project as well. One thing that was important to me with that project was placing myself in the narrative, being open about sort of my involvement with the thing that I was working on. And you don't have to do that, but it's something that you can do to sort of, yeah, maybe add a different perspective, there's a quote by Jill Torres that says there is a certain amount of honesty in being highly subjective. And that's not always right for every project, but sometimes it is. Sometimes leaning into that subjectivity will give you, the photographer, um, maybe more authority in what you're saying by being honest about, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. So how do you make it happen? I'm a big fan of writing a lot, all the time, especially proposals. And it's a really good way of getting your ideas, writing not just one proposal, but several of different lengths, really elaborating on your idea, the who, what, when, where, and why. You know, what is this project about? Where is it happening? How am I doing it? All of these things, writing about that in a variety of formats. And that way, if you do apply for a grant, you can use one of these project proposals you've written and just sort of copy and paste it in there. It's ready to go. You know, on a personal level that, okay, I've written about this thing, I've written about it in varying lengths. So I understand it. I know what I'm doing. I know why I'm doing it. And also it's handy, you know, I want to talk about why I'm doing it. Oh, look, I already have this write up. So yeah, write a lot. It's a good way to get started. And also just know what's your elevator pitch. Can you sum up the project you're going to do to your grandmother so she can go and tell her friends about it? You should be able to do that. Understand what you're doing, you know, lean into the complexities of it, but also know how to condense those complexities into something smaller because you're going to be asked to do that. And if you're applying for grants or contests, it's really important to research different foundations, where your money's going. There's a lot of contests that charge really exorbitant entry fees, and it's really unclear of why, other than just, okay, you know, a money-making thing, that's great. But the thing about those contests is they're really exclusive, and I'm a big proponent of make this industry as inclusive and accessible as possible. If somebody's charging a really big entry fee and nobody really knows where it's going, it's going to be people that have the means, that are well off, that are privileged, that are entering that. That really, really condenses the field in a way that isn't fair. So apply for things, but also make sure you feel good about what you're applying for. Make sure you know what the organization is doing with your entry fee. Make a budget in advance. Travel, food, equipment, depending on what your project is, and write about that if you're applying for something. So that way, the organization you're working with knows that you've thought about their money. You know, what are you going to do with this money that you may be given? And can you use it responsibly? A lot for some contingency because things change. The deeper you get into a project, the more things will evolve and shift. That's normal. Just make sure that you plan for that. And also think about your final form of your project. Is it going to be a book? Is it going to be a show? You know, what money will I need to go and produce this in a way that's finalized? Books are expensive. Exhibitions are expensive. Write that in when thinking about just how do you make your project happen. There's some resources down below that I've used for finding grants, for finding contests, for finding just ways of financing my work. There's lots of stuff out there. Sometimes knowing where to go can be really confusing and intimidating, but if you want to screenshot those down below, check them out later. They're all really good resources for, yeah, various organizations that are open to financing photographers. So yeah, as I was saying, thinking about your work, how you want it to be seen. So there's a myriad of ways to do that, and you should think about that early on because it's going to affect the way you shoot. I knew early on that I was doing a book, so I collected a large amount of interviews. I collected a large amount of text. I kind of envisioned the images flowing together on a page in a book form. But if it's going to be on a wall, you're going to have to be thinking about how your images work together in a different way. And of course, that still can grow and change. Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes that comes together last, you know, this sort of final form. But it is something to bear in mind because it can help if you know sort of, yes, I want to make a book. I want to make a zine. I want to make an interactive web article, this is what I want to do with it. So I'm going to shoot accordingly. I'm going to make my images in a way that I know that they will work in this format. And also, if I'm applying for grants, I can say, hey, this is the final product. This is how much money I'm going to need to make this product. It's just good to know, think ahead in that sense. So yeah, we're getting to the end, but before we do, I'm just going to share a few things that I wish that I'd known when I was starting out. And I mean, heck, I'm still starting out. I'm 26. I have no idea what I'm doing 90% of the time. It's a constant learning experience. It really is. And you should, be open to constantly learning and growing. Anyways, rejection's part of life. And I wish that I had known that sooner, but you do have to develop a really thick skin. You're going to get a lot of no's. You're going to get way more no's than you will get yeses. And that's okay. That doesn't mean anything about you or your work. That just is part of it. There's a lot of people out there that are photographers, that are good photographers, that have things to say. And sometimes you just have to find the place that's right for you at the right time. Don't compare yourself to, so-and-so got this thing and they posted about it on Instagram and their career is going so much better than mine, because, nobody's posting about the 10 rejection emails, or not even rejection emails, just like not responses that they're getting from the places they pitched. Just getting a rejection sometimes is great because it means, oh my God, somebody took the time to respond to me. That doesn't always happen. It's normal. It's terrible. I'm very sensitive. It's hard, but it's normal. But at the same time, don't stop trying. Those cold emails you send off to publications, sometimes you'll get a yes. So it never hurts to ask. It never hurts to try. Don't be entitled about it. Understand that editors are looking at a lot of work and they're probably not, there's not always going to be a place for yours. That's okay. But sometimes there is. So don't get that, I'm just going to be rejected. Don't let that mentality define the way you work. It never hurts to ask. So keep pushing at it. Luck is important. Timing is important. Sometimes you'll hit something at just the right time. I had an article in the British Journal of Photography in February of this year. And the reason that happened was I emailed them the week that it went to print. The subject of the project was really relevant to that issue. They were trying to fill a spot. I emailed on the right day at the right time, and that's what it was. It wasn't like they came to me. I asked, and it was luck. It was sheer luck in so many ways. And also take care of yourself. If you're working on a project that is intense, that is dark at times, you're exploring really personal stuff that can be scary. It's easy to let just, taking care of yourself by the wayside. Don't do that. You're going to be a lot better of a photographer if you are healthy in a physical sense, if you're eating and sleeping and, just being good to yourself, but also good to your mental health. Good to the people you love, checking in with people, being open about where you are, having a community of people that you trust, that'll give you feedback, that'll understand sort of, why this thing you're doing is important to you. Don't keep it inside. Really, it's not healthy. There's this myth of the lone photographer going out and making this amazing project. Well, again, as I covered before, that's really rare. Collaboration, especially now, is vital. It's really hard to survive out there as just this one photographer doing this one thing. You're not going to get work. You're not going to make good work that way if that's the way you operate all the time. But also you're going to be really unhappy. And, you need people around you that you can bounce ideas off of, that you trust, that will, see if you're maybe going to some weird places in your brain, being maybe mean to yourself in a way that you shouldn't be about your own work. But we'll also tell you, hey, you could be doing this thing better in a really loving way. It's important. So that's what I have planned to say. I would love to take some questions now.
So yes, we've got quite a few questions. We'll start with one from Jessica. She says, fabulous project. How did you find your subjects?
Fun. So my subjects, gosh, it came from so many different outlets. I started posting on Facebook groups. I started doing research into women that are activists and that are sort of active against these things that are touched on in the project. Sent a lot of cold emails asking, hey, I'm doing this thing. Do you want to be a part of it? Some were acquaintances from college that I reached out to, like, hey, we haven't spoken in 7 years, but can I sleep on your couch? It's fine. And I used a website called couchsurfing.com for the days where I couldn't find a place to stay because I was on the road for 6 weeks, jumping from place to place. And there were some nights where I'm like, well, I don't really have anywhere to go. Me just send an email to this random person and tell them what I'm doing on couch surfing and hope that they say yes. So it was really just any possible place that I could find.
Yeah. Wow. That's I think just going around couch surfing is very brave. Staying, you know, when you're staying with people that you've not met before, that's incredible.
It was intense. But again, like I made sure that I did vet people. There's reviews on that website, so I knew that, okay, this person is safe. And also it would have been different. I do think had I been staying with men rather than young women, I would have been a lot more uncomfortable. But everybody I stayed with was lovely. They really were.
And they're registered to a website. It's not like you were knocking on random doors saying, can I sleep on your sofa?
Right. Well, actually, I did meet somebody in a coffee shop once. There was one night I didn't have somewhere to be, and I was just sitting in a coffee shop, like trying to find a hotel. And I strike up a conversation with somebody, and he's like, "Oh, I have a friend that might be interested in this." And it was very much a just by chance. But I didn't knock on doors. So.
No, you went with the flow, and the flow carried you on. Fantastic. Right, so Amber has asked several questions. Where did you do your MA, and how has postgraduate study developed your practice?
So I did my MA at LCC, London College of Communication, which is part of UAL, and it's pretty much changed not just my practice but my life. It really, really, really did. I cannot speak highly enough for that MA. Yeah, the things that I do now as a photographer, I could not have dreamed doing years ago. For a lot of reasons. Again, the research component came from that MA. I learned how to do that in a more organized and thoughtful way. I learned how to, be more critical towards my own work and the images that I see in my day-to-day life. But also because of the tutors on that course being very open, I felt like I had an environment where I could look into bits of my own history and my past. Part of this project came from, I alluded before, I was having some pretty serious conversations with my mom that inspired this. I had a death in the family that was quite dramatic 2 years before the MA, and ended up doing a lot of personal work with my mother prior to this project. We collaborated, exploring that, and it just opened me up to a really different way of working that was, on the one hand, a lot more academic, a lot more well-researched and thoughtful, but also deeply personal and deeply transformative for my entire life.
Okay, so I think that the final question that Amber has asked, I think you've kind of almost answered it in a way, because she says, have you done any work which is as a direct consequence of the MA? But it sounds like it shifted everything you do. So a lot of your work has come as a result of it.
It has. I'm in a bit of an odd position in that front, though, given that I'm American. I fought very hard to stay in London, but I could not get a visa. So I went back, and then within a week of going back, I actually did have a series of jobs lined up in the US that I found thanks to my qualifications on the MA. I did a work experience with The Guardian thanks to that as well. A lot of those jobs did not happen, unfortunately. But I'm finally getting back into the swing of it. I have my job at the Photo Lab now. I'm going to be actually teaching my first college course remotely in the spring, and I'm qualified to do that thanks to the MA, which is thrilling. It's kind of a dream job. So it's roundabout way. I definitely had to recalculate what I was doing, but I would have a very different life had I not done that.
Okay, thank you. Laura has asked, what is your next project?
Great question. I'm figuring that out. I've been working on a really loose series of images of just sort of what it's been like in this pandemic, having to move across the country. And there, I don't know if it's so much of this project as it is a diary. I might do something with those. I think this year mainly has been me trying to get my feet on the ground and get settled after moving across the world again. And yeah, I'm still making work. I'm still taking photographs, but it's just not in this sort of structured, planned out, researched way that I'd like to work. I'm going to do that again, but a
Yeah.
lot of that depends on just where I am in my life.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people, I mean, particularly at the moment, it's very hard to get your feet on the ground and a sense of structure, isn't it? Because everything's different and unknown.
It is. And I would also just like to say, I and most every photographer I know have had a really hard time with this year. It's been scary. I've had to recalculate my expectations for most everything. And that's normal. So if you're sitting here feeling like, oh, I don't know how to do a project like this right now with all of these lockdowns and all of these restrictions and all this uncertainty and this fear, and that's normal. I'm in the same place. We all are. So don't feel pressured like, oh my God, I have to get out there and make this amazing work right now. No, like be kind to yourself before anything else. Make sure you're in a good place and then the work will come.
Yeah, great advice. A different Laura has asked, do you think blogging is important to grow visibility?
Yes and no. I used to blog a lot more than I do now. I like writing, so it's a natural medium for me, but I think that, oh gosh, it depends on what you're trying to do. When I was working commercially, blogging was really crucial because I could post entire sessions. Like it was sort of a calling card for, this is what a session will look like if you hire me. But with my own work, I found that my personal projects sort of serve the same purpose as like being a set of images that you can access online. I find Instagram to be a lot more useful in terms of growing visibility, which is a weird thing to say. Social media is kind of a scary black hole. I have a love-hate relationship with it. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of editors on there that do commission based off of Instagram, and that's a lot more accessible, a lot easier to sort of stumble upon new things. If you have a blog, somebody has to go out and find that blog and, go through Google, go through your website, whereas Instagram, it's easier to just sort of pop up in somebody's feed and then you never know what'll happen. So I would say focus on Instagram over blogging for that reason, if you're doing sort of personal documentary work.
Yeah, okay. And research your hashtags, I guess.
Yeah, hashtag is good. Locations are good. Interacting with other people that are doing things you're interested in. I'm a little averse to networking for the sake of networking. Like if I'm following somebody commenting on their Instagram, it's because I really like it and I'm interested in what they're doing. And, I want people to know that. I want to use Instagram as a way of being supportive and kind because I want to be, because, maybe they'll follow me back. So do that, you can grow your audience by commenting on other people's work, following people, but also just for your sanity and for everybody else's sanity and for just making sure that, again, this community is as kind and open and honest as possible. Make sure you're doing that for the right reasons. So
be authentic, I think, is
be authentic.
So,
because people can also tell. I can tell if somebody's like leaving me flame emojis on an Instagram post, and it's like, this is really not relevant to like anything you're doing or I'm doing, and like, really, I'm not gonna follow you, dude. Like, so.
Okay, now the same Laura has asked another question. Do you tend to work on single projects with single focus, or do you bounce through several at a time?
Oh gosh, I feel like I always have a lot of things going on at once in normal times. I like having a long-term project, so something that is going to evolve with me as I go, I can take with me no matter where I am. But I also like having these sort of smaller, maybe like work on something for a week in a certain place. There's a time limit. I like having both of those things happening, so that way I don't get bored. And yeah, I don't know. I think long-term projects are really important, but also I personally will get in moods where I'm just like, I have to make something now, and that's when the smaller things come in handy. So yeah, having both is good.
Okay. Anila says she finds it hard to stick to a project. She has ideas but struggles to pull it together. How would you break down sorry, how would you break down how you start a project that's passionate to you and you alone?
Okay. I can very much relate to the feeling of starting a project and having trouble finishing it. Um, Honestly, I mean, my first obvious piece of advice is stay the course, but that's not really helpful. What's actually helpful for me is being held accountable by my friends. Again, that thing of having a creative community, having photographers that you trust, having people that'll give you feedback, um, and sending them the things you're doing as you go, you know, knowing that they're open to receiving your work, that they can critique. Just having a group of like 3 or 4 people that you'll be like, hey, you know, I'm starting this thing. I might find it hard to push through, but I need you to keep me accountable and keep me motivated. And yeah, kind of just peer accountability goes so far. And that's why, again, the MA was great for me because I had that both through my tutors, but also an amazing group of peers that, you know, we still Skype and we still stay in contact. I actually sent off a series of photos to a friend this morning, like, hey, you know, this is the thing I've been working on. What do you think? If I'm doing it alone, I'm going to lose interest. I'm going to second guess myself. I'm going to get in a weird mental rabbit hole. But if there's people around me saying like, hey, this is good, or hey, like you're on the right course, maybe look at this and this and this, change that. But like, keep doing the thing. That's how I keep doing the thing.
Well, I'm not sure from Anila's question is whether she actually struggles to start actually taking the photographs. You know, maybe she has a few ideas and you sort of think, oh, that's a good idea for a project, but it's maybe taking that next step could be the issue. I might be wrong, Anila. I might be putting words in your mouth, but hang on, she's just.
No, it's not the case.
It's compiling it all. She's pulling it together. I think that's the issue.
I will say, for anybody out there that might be having trouble actually just starting, setting a time and sticking to that time, and again, having accountability, maybe being like, hey, this is, you know, my boyfriend or my friend or like someone come with me on this shoot. You know, I'm doing this today and you're coming with me. And like, we're putting it in our calendar a week in advance because it's happening. That helps. But compiling it, yeah, again, a community like this is, I think, the answer in a lot of ways. Having a group of people and showing them, you know, what you're doing, asking for feedback, compiling it all. Just for me, it helps making little prints, like going to Snappy Snaps and printing off the photos that I have, getting all of like my crazy elements of this project that seems really disparate and putting it on the ground and organizing it physically, you know, being able to hold and touch my images and move them around. I always joke that my apartment looks like I'm a private investigator or like a stalker or something, because I have like bits of tape on the walls and maps and like photos strewn everywhere. It just looks like a crazy person's lair. But it helps, you know, making this sort of physical space in which you can actually start compiling stuff and making it make sense, and sequencing and editing, and bringing other people into that and being like, hey, can you help me move these things around?
And I guess if you bring other people in, they'll pick up a picture and sort of ask you about it, and you can explain it, and then it might sort of make you think, actually, that links better to that one.
Right.
Or I need to go down this area and maybe shoot some images of this, you know, sort of build it out that way.
No, I feel like I'm just being very repetitive in this, but you cannot do it alone. You cannot do it alone, no matter what you're doing, as personal as it is. Like, it's so, so important to have people around you that can, either you're collaborating with them or they just give you feedback. Heck, you know, just talking to my boyfriend has been great over the past few months, because I'm very limited in who I can see. I see him a lot. He's not a photographer. He is an engineer. But he knows me well, and he knows the way my brain works, and he'll ask me questions. And because he's an engineer and not a photographer, he thinks in a different way. And sometimes I'm like, oh my God, you said a thing that really helped me connect these two dots.
Yeah, I think it is really important. Like you say, actually, a lot of your images will be seen by people who aren't photographers, and it will spark different questions in their minds, and you might want to address those.
Right.
Okay. So last question. Rebecca has said, I'm new to all this. How do you protect your intellectual property while making inquiries, gathering ideas, applying for funding about your project? She's had ideas borrowed twice now, and it's quite demoralizing.
Ooh, goodness. That's a tough one. And when it comes for applying to things, submitting to publications, really the best thing you can do is just read the terms and conditions really thoroughly. Don't sign anything until you read through it. You're legally protected. It's your work until you sign that away. Yeah, do some research into whatever country you're in, what the rules are around intellectual property, so you can arm yourself with that, with a sort of objective legal perspective on when other people can use your work and when they can't. But I also, yeah, it's demoralizing, and it's happened to me as well. I think it's not extremely common, but it does happen. But I would say it's more from individuals rather than organizations, because if you're working with an organization, there is a legal code that people must adhere to. But if somebody sees a photo that you took on Instagram, maybe replicates it, maybe borrows your ideas without asking, without talking to you, that's not great. It sucks. It feels really bad. Again, that's happened to me as well. But honestly, the best thing I can say is that it kind of sucks for the person that stole the idea too, because you're the one that had the idea. You're the one that can elaborate that and expand on it and make it better and refine it. You can bring it forward and people will realize that it is yours because you're the one that owns it, and it's going to show in the work. That might be, so that other person might get a lot of likes for that one instance, but what are they going to do after that? It's not theirs. They can't bring it forward. So trust that your work is good. Trust that you are the person that is the right person to be making it. This other person is not, and that will come out eventually. Yeah.
I think on Instagram, there's an element, if you know about it, then you can call them on it, because if they've pinched your idea from Instagram, then clearly they saw a post which was earlier on your feed. So you can say, hey, that's remarkably similar to the picture I took. You seem to have used my idea, or sometimes maybe they've copied your caption or something like that. I know years ago, my partner, when he used to make music on tapes, there was a thing where musicians used to put their music onto a tape and then send it by recorded delivery to themselves, or to even to a lawyer or someone like that. And I guess you could do something like that with a USB stick with some images or a synopsis of what you're doing. You could always put that in the post by recorded delivery. You don't open it, but you just keep it there just on the off chance, if it's something that's really, really important to you, perhaps.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's the end of the questions, I think. Yes, but there's lots of people in the comments saying that they've really enjoyed your talk, they loved your enthusiasm, and they've learned a lot, so thank you for that. Anila says Instagram is notorious for copying ideas and images, and it's super annoying. And yes, it absolutely is. I think there's a lot of people who don't realize that it's not legal, but also there's a very fine line between being inspired by and stealing or copying.
Right.
Play a part in calling people out on that. But yeah, thank you very much, Coco. It's been really fascinating. Now, if people want to see more of your images, I know you've got your projects on your website, haven't you? And it's a really great collection of images to go and have a look at. So if you want to tell people your website address, but I will post it when we put this on YouTube and on the website and things.
Sure. It's cocoalaney.com. So COCOA, so Coco is in chocolate, LANEY @gmail.com. Wait, that's my email. Oh my God. I was going to say, feel free to email me if you have questions. But oh my God, cocoalaney.com. And also cocoalaney @gmail.com, and also @cocoalaney at Instagram. Really, I would love to chat with anybody out there that has further questions. I'm super open. Yeah, reach out if you would care to.
Great, thanks very much. Well, it's been lovely to speak with you and to see your images and to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This was lovely. Have a great day, evening.
Bye.